You know, I had so much fun in yesterday's special on saving the CBC, and I learned so much, especially from our mergers and acquisitions expert who talked about how the CBC could actually live and thrive post-government. We didn't have enough time to digest it all with John Robson, so he generously agreed to come back on to talk about it for a full segment, and he joins us now from Ottawa. John, thanks for making the time.
I'm happy to do it.
What did you think about the show in general? What was your number one impression of my personal plan to save the CBC by freeing it from government?
I think that the CBC has a real problem on its hands in the person of one Ezra Levant. They've never been challenged like this, as far as I know, and they are just finding it extremely difficult to figure out how to respond and whether to respond. And if they just ignore you with upturned nose, won't you go away? And I am pretty confident you won't.
Well, I appreciate the personal kudos, but what about the substance? Here's what I learned yesterday. I learned that there are MPs, even in the Conservative government, that don't agree with the super funding. I mean, Rob Anders came on. I learned about how it might actually go down, what a post-sale CBC might look like. I think those are discussions that we haven't had, especially Mr. Dunlop from Macmillan, the big law firm. I thought that was, it helped me think that privatizing the CBC isn't just some impossibility. It's actually something that's done all the time in the world.
Oh, certainly. All kinds of governments have found themselves forced to reduce the scope of the state because it was overextended into areas it was not good at. In New Zealand, decades ago, they had a very large program of privatization and found themselves disentangling things, learning as they went. And one of the things that Roger Douglas, who was the finance minister, said is that we would privatize some industry and they'd say, oh, we couldn't possibly make it. We need subsidies. We need price controls because our inputs are controlled. And Douglas would say, right, well, I'll go and decontrol your inputs. And so the whole thing can get into a virtuous circle rather than a vicious one once you get started on this.
You know, in my home province of Alberta, all the liquor stores used to be owned by the government, as they are in most Canadian provinces. And when they were privatized, you had all these liquor stores saying, no, we must have our government job. Well, guess what? Every little liquor store worker became a liquor store entrepreneur, became a business person, and I bet you that 99 out of 100 would never go back to working for the man because they work for themselves now. Some of them have gotten really rich, some failed, but they probably knew more about running those liquor stores in that neighborhood than anyone else, especially than the government. I think that if CBC staff themselves look at this as a great opportunity to be sort of an owner-manager, they would stop pouting about it and say, yeah, I'd like to own the CBC.
Well, exactly. I mean, given the choice, most of us would not want a government job. Government jobs are infamous for stifling creativity and sending you to the want ads in a hurry. But they're so used to it and they have such trouble imagining how else it could be. And that's, I think the show has also underlined a very important point about life generally. The great problem in human existence, it's not finding answers, it's realizing what the right questions are. And as soon as you start asking how do we privatize the CBC, you discover that this has been done before, that there's all kinds of things you may have to figure out on the way, but they've been figured out in different circumstances, and it's all gone very well. And you realize, hey, wait a minute. As soon as we framed it right, we saw that it could be done.
Let's go through some clips very quickly. I'm going to roll a clip, and then I'll ask you for like a 2-sentence response. Okay, so the first clip is from Mr. Dunlop. It's when I asked him about the union mentality of the CBC. Here's what he said.
Well, you've given a great example. I think WestJet's a great example of a company that has engendered all kinds of enthusiasm from their employees, right down to the flight attendants and when you're on the plane. They are as engaged as anyone. And that's what the public sees, quite frankly. So with the CBC, we see it online, we see it on the radio, we see it on television. I think there's a matter of saying, okay, you know what, if we do well, you're going to participate in the profits. I think that's the key.
But in the profits, you're also going to find yourself having fun, and that helps dispel that sour union mentality very quickly.
Yeah, you know, because they'll have a little bit of control over their lives instead of being told what to do. Here's another clip from Mr. Dunlop. Tell me what you think of this one.
Well, I think it would probably have less assets, probably have less scope. I mean, the CBC operates under not just a traditional company format. It operates with the political essence of the government behind it because it services all areas of Canada. I think that a changed CBC, a privatized CBC, would be quite different. It wouldn't have your office in Nairobi, or maybe it would. I don't know if that was a strategic part. But I think many of the assets and the liabilities associated with the operation would be quite different. They would probably have reduced scope.
Probably a smaller CBC.
Probably a smaller footprint.
What do you think it would do more of? We know it would probably do less Nairobi, Kenya stories. What do you think it might do more of?
You know, there may be more focus on things that are less politically oriented, maybe things that are more internationally focused, less on Canada specifically, because when you're owned by the government of Canada, there has to be a particular Canadian orientation. Right. So it may be driven by the listenership or the reader, the viewership.
So, you know, it's almost fun, John. You used the word fun. It is fun to daydream of what the CBC could be like if it was private, if it could do what it wanted instead of having to be a government department. What do you think the CBC would look like if it was in private hands?
Well, I think probably the difference would be not so much what it did as the way that it did it. The CBC has a particular kind of preachy, condescending tone that I think plays only to a small segment of the potential audience, and I suspect that they would get rid of that. Operationally, I think they would be freed from a terrible dilemma. Right now, they're meant to be, they're subsidized because they do things that private companies wouldn't, and yet, in order to keep the subsidy down, they're meant to be commercially successful. This gives managers an impossible mandate, and I think they would be much more nimble. I think they'd be more fun. It'd be more fun inside and more fun to watch and listen to.
You know, John, we only have time for one more clip, and I thought it was getting to almost everything we've talked about: the government mentality, the siege mentality, the not knowing how to deal with critics, it was the weirdness. When I came there, and I admit I'm a fairly annoying guy. I showed up and said I want to talk to someone, but instead of sending some PR flack to handle me, they dispatched 4 security guards, including this VP security, and watch what he says. In about 30 seconds, he talks about it being against the law for me to be there. I need a permit to film. He had a whole bunch of weird things to say. Look at this, and let's close on your response to this clip of their manager of security who was dispatched to handle the Ezra problem.
Do you have a permit to film?
No, we don't work for the government, so we don't need permits to film things.
But you know it's private property, right?
So actually, Carolyn Dunn told me that it's public property, that it's owned by the public, and I'm part of the public.
Perhaps you should do some research. It is private property, sir.
Do I need your permission?
To
film?
Yes. You need a permit to be on the property.
What kind of permit?
Prohibited activity, sir.
Prohibited by whom?
By the law. By the company, CBC.
Well, which one? Is the company the law?
No, sir.
Yeah, see, the impossible dilemma, is it public or is it private? And it tries to be both and it ends up being neither. You get the worst of both. Yeah. Really, if it were a private company, they could tell you to get off the property, and if people didn't like it, they could sell their shares or stop watching, stop paying for it. The CBC is in a very difficult position, and they think they're in a happy position, and they're fighting to keep it. They would be better off privatized, and so would the rest of us.
You know, that's a great point. He didn't know what to say because they like the public broadcaster, we're owned by the people. I was just standing there in the open lobby. He was saying, kick me. If that was a private company, absolutely I would have left. But, you know, I think that you're right. They're sort of like a camel designed by a committee or something, or a horse designed by a committee. Anyways, I really appreciate you chewing this over. And, hey, now you're hosting Byline this week, am I right?
I am indeed hosting Byline.
Oh, man, that's a great show, and that's on at 9 o'clock Eastern, am I right?
It is. I'm having a great time doing it, and it's a privilege to be allowed to.
Well, you bring so much, you pack such a punch. I'm grateful you've taken time to join us today. I'll watch your show tonight.
Great, thanks.